Hello and welcome back to the Forest stage here at 80th Barcelona. I wanted to introduce to you Alexander Guy, the head of marketing at Xerion. Please give him a warm welcome. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you. Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it. Hey, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. I appreciate you sticking with me to the end here at this great conference. Lovely city. It's a real pleasure to be here to speak to you all. I'm actually really thrilled also to touch grass with you all. I think this is the first time that I've ever spoken on grass in bare feet. I'm enjoying the experience so far. What I want to talk about today is something that I think should be on the minds of every builder, creator, founder, artist in the space right now, and that's essentially how to prepare to onboard the next big wave of Web3 adopters. It may seem counterintuitive as we are in the middle of a bear market to talk about how we prepare for the next big sort of surge of users, but I think it's now, while we're talking a lot about building, it's the best time to think about that. But before we get into that, I want to talk about something that I'm sure you all have heard in the space during the bull run, which is like this enthusiastic, sort of aspirational, like, when we get the next billion, NFT holders, crypto adopters, investors, DeFi users, the next billion, right? The next billion. And obviously that was pretty, like a little bit of an exaggeration, I think. But what was behind it, I think, was a sort of a philosophy and perhaps like a hope that we were ready as an industry for like true mass adoption. Like we'd finally reached a moment where we were mature enough, products were advanced enough, the user experience was excellent enough that we could actually onboard a large group of people who weren't necessarily in the like early adopter zone. But bizarrely, at the same time, and this is something I'm sure you all have heard, is this sort of almost clarion call that we're so early, this is just the beginning, we're just getting started. And like these things are at the same time very contradictory. So how is a community expressing both of these emotions at the same time? What's the truth there? I think that probably what we want to look at is, okay, in the context now of the bear market, where are we? Like, is it ready for this mass adoption moment, or are we still like working things out? And that's kind of what I want to interrogate a little bit before we get into the presentation itself. I guess as you can expect, it's a little more complicated than like a simple dichotomy like that. Even in the face of the bear market, NFT and NFT sales have been pretty resilient to the fluctuations of the market overall. Mainstream brands like Farfetch and PayPal have recently accepted crypto payments in the last couple of weeks even, suggesting that it's a viable currency and they can actually profit from it too. DAOs like Toucan, who's here at the conference with us, are tackling real world like use cases like climate change. But at the same time, it's a very fearful kind of environment, and rightly so. The bear market headlines are just everywhere, and I'm sure if you're like me, you've gotten like almost panicked phone calls from family members maybe, sort of wondering if you're okay. Oh my God, like, is everything all right? I saw on the news, these types of things. And so like, in the face of all this, I think that it's worth revisiting this idea about mass adoption, how we actually prepare to bring on this new wave of users, particularly non-advanced users who are kind of coming to this for the first time. And I want to suggest that while we are ready as an industry, I think there's enough enthusiasm, intelligence, passion for what we're doing here. We are ready to bring on and reach our first billion, not the next. We're done talking about the next billion, I think, for a while. But we are ready to bring on our first billion users. But there's a little bit of a catch, I think. I believe that beyond a lot of the technical aspects, a lot of the products that exist, there are some pretty fundamental human aspects that are missing from the way we bring on new people to this space. So the first is language. I don't think I need to say to anybody in this room, the language in our industry is quite confusing, particularly to a new person. That confusion breeds sort of this idea where, despite all the information available and resources out there sort of is strangely a lack of trustable information a lot of the time. And it can become really tricky to understand who you should trust and who you can't. This means that the learning curve to crypto adoption currently and Web3 adoption is really steep. And unfortunately, as we've all seen and witnessed, I'm sure maybe some of us personally, is that this breeds like losses and liquidations. And I think this is a compounding loop that starts to spin faster and faster the larger our potential audience gets. And so what do we actually need to do to harness the potential of Web3 and actually make ourselves ready as an industry to welcome on all these new users? First, I mentioned language, and I think we desperately need some sort of consolidation and agreement on what different terms mean. There's a lot of inconsistency in the way that we talk about key words and key terms in our industry that must be like shared. We need to have a common vocabulary. We also, I think, need to rethink the way we support and welcome new users and onboard new users to the space. User care, support, these are terms that I think Web3 has typically shunned for a lot of reasons. There's a lot of reasons for that, but it's not something that you hear a lot from projects talking about how they're going to support users and take them through. Again, quite paradoxically, we talk a lot about how community is everything. So which one is it? I think we need to rethink the way that support and users are taken care of. And lastly, if you were expecting a technical talk, I'm sorry, this is not the technical talk that we're going to get here. I actually think that we need to, for the end user, simplify the technical experience of a lot of our products and projects so that then it makes it easier for someone new to come to the space. So that's like kind of what we're going to talk about today. Before we jump into that, I want to talk a little bit about Xerion, the company I work for. So if you don't know Xerion, maybe you do. If you know us, we used to be a portfolio tracker for DeFi. Over the last year, we've kind of been in a transformation where we've added a number of different trading features, basically building slowly to what we are now, which is a smart and social Web3 wallet. Basically, the mission of Xerion is to open up opportunities for people to explore all of Web3 in one place. I'm Alex. I guess I should have started there, but that's who you're speaking to. I'm head of marketing and growth at Xerion. My background is primarily in Web2 growth, but about a couple years ago, I got really excited as a user into the Web3 space and just had to start working here. So I've been at Xerion for a year now. I'm really into sports NFTs, so if you want to talk about SoRare or NBA Top Shots, let's chat. I'm happy to have a conversation about that at any time. And although I'm American, I guess you can all tell from my accent, I'm based in Paris, so I just had a short flight over here. I also like quotes. Quotes can be a little derivative, I guess, but I think in the right context, they can actually help consolidate and focus our minds and our opinions here on some key concepts. And when I talk about language, when we think about language, I was really inspired by this William Gibson quote, which is that language is to the mind more than light is to the eye. And if we think about that, what he's saying is that language has the power to unlock and open up potential in people's minds even more than seeing something can. And this is actually a real problem in the Web3 space. I believe fundamentally that the language we use isn't inclusive. It's, as I said before, it has a steep learning curve, and unfortunately that learning curve creates a lot of anxiety. Meme culture, which is very fun, especially for new users, creates very much this feeling like of an insider and an outsider. And if you're not on the inside, if you don't get the joke, you can feel really like, I don't know, separate from what people are talking about. It's also very time-consuming, as I said, to learn this stuff, and new people in the space who aren't here currently might not want to or have the time to invest to learn all of this. And I also think that the language we use frequently discourages diversity, which is not good. We need more diverse perspectives and backgrounds in this space. And so I think that a great example of this, one of my favorite examples of this, is something that's so fundamental to how you use and access Web3 in the first place, which is the seed phrase. I did a 10-minute search on Google before this conference, and I found those 4 different words from those 4 companies about what a seed phrase is, or like a seed phrase. And although there's, maybe minor technical differences and distinctions between some of these things, maybe they don't function in the same way with every product, et cetera, I think that actually illustrates the point that how can there be, for something that is so crucial to understand not only what it is, but how it works and how to protect yourself, how can there be 4 different ways to talk about that? That seems really crazy. And so I can remember even when I was getting started, finding different terms, some of these on the screen, and thinking, wait, do I have that? Is that something I do? What am I doing? Oh my goodness, what am I looking at here? And that kind of uncertainty, as I said, really creates a lot of fear for new users and unfortunately limits our overall power to bring new people into the space. As I say, this unclear and inconsistent and sometimes vague language really creates this idea of exclusion. And I think as an industry, what we need to be striving for is actually to create a more inclusive environment. So the big thing to take away, I think, is that the stress we develop by having inconsistent language blocks adoption overall and limits our potential. Second thing that I think is important to think about when we're preparing as builders to bring on this new group of users is Empathy and like the relationship with users is so fundamental, and it seems so obvious. Again, we're the industry that talks about community, community, community. You'll hear it all the time. Many people will tell me, hey, why do we even need marketing? Community does it. And like, that's a great principle, and I understand where that comes from. But unfortunately, the reality of how we actually interact with customers, especially when they have questions or problems, is not consistent with that ethos. So the best way that I can think about it is the support stack that projects use is totally, totally not built with users in mind. The documentation pages that these projects work so diligently on to detail what their products do are frequently cryptic and totally unapproachable. Like the intro slide will have totally incomprehensible language in it that no one can understand. It's often very difficult to find answers to your questions, even if you're not somebody that needs to be handheld, even if you're just looking to solve your problems. It's difficult to actually find the answers to questions frequently. And Discord, although we all love it, I'm sure, is often poorly managed and impossible to navigate, even when you have the resource to have like a really great mod, as many of the projects that are here and in the space do. It's very, very difficult when you're just coming in to actually know where to start and how to get going. And so I think that despite all that, the infrastructure in Web3 is actually really well set up to support users more proactively. First of all, involving the community itself and your community in how you support users, either by getting ambassadors or by asking for documentation support or by maybe having community calls where led by the community itself, users actually can act not only as your great ambassadors to spread the word about your product, but also to help answer questions. One of the things we've done quite well at Xerion is like include our community in the way that we support and talk to our users. We bring them on in community calls all the time. We have the users themselves answer questions. We've made custom Discord roles that basically bring them in as like, not just an ambassador, but like a trusted support rep. And so like actually there's a lot of ways within the community structure that we have built in Web3 to be able to use your community to support the new users that are coming onto the platform more efficiently. Similarly, I mentioned docs. These doc pages are the storefront, basically, of your dApp or protocol in a lot of ways. And just like a storefront that has a really crappy, like, I don't know, black curtains on the outside, you're not really going to want to go in and explore. It's going to be very off-putting. So I encourage projects to really spend a lot of time thinking through important questions like mission and values and what the product is actually ending up to be created to do. Put a lot of effort into your shop front. Make sure your window looks good, because otherwise people will just walk right past you and never remember. And I think the last bit is about feedback and open feedback. We have many projects in Web3 have their roadmaps published, right? So you can even suggest things, you can upvote. There's a lot of systems to do this. Obviously, governance is a whole other way that this happens in our space. But a lot of times, especially with not like projects that aren't DAOs, it's sort of like, okay, I've suggested a thing and it's thrown into the ocean and I never know whether or not the team reviews it, thinks about it, talks about it, brings it into their consideration at all. So like, I think that a lot of projects are already doing the first step. They're opening up like suggestions and things like that, feedback in general, but they're not closing the loop and actually then communicating back, hey, thanks for that idea, user, whatever. We've actually implemented that, or hey, that's coming soon. And these are a lot of like both automated, there are automated ways to do this through messaging, but there's also like a community and mod and support perspective that I think you can add in there. So I think those three areas are great places for projects to sort of rethink how they bring their community and support like together a little bit more. I think that there's probably three elements that you can think about when you're trying to drive this more community-driven support or create this community-driven support loop. First of all, there's availability. This is availability of information, it's availability of access, it's availability of someone online. We have two of the most valuable employees at Xerion are on our support team, and we have a chat in our app that someone can ask a question and get a response within like 30 minutes, I think it tells me on the chat. And like the fact that we're available and ready and like there for users is a huge value add. It actually ends up, I think, being a little bit of a superpower for us, not just because these two gentlemen are just fantastic. Related to availability in my mind is responsiveness. How quickly are you getting answers to people? How actively are you communicating when there's been a problem? How are you communicating that there is a problem in the first place? Maybe you can be proactive about how you communicate this. But in any case, being responsive is a great way to make sure your community feels they're included. And I think the last thing is very much about consistency. It relates to language, absolutely. But there needs to be consistency and absolute alignment between your product, your marketing, your website, your support. Oftentimes, support members or community members aren't really brought into like the roadmap. So a user will ask like, hey, when is this coming? And the support person or the community mod will have no idea like what to respond. And maybe the tech team is actually building that as we speak. So there needs to be consistency and alignment across the entire organization, and then the support, like whether it's community driven, whether it's documentation, et cetera, or it's actually support staff, you actually are able to like have a consistent message to your users. And I think now kind of the last thing that I want to talk about is about the technology itself. And this quote, I think at this point is so ubiquitous that I probably don't even need to read it. But basically, starting with the customer experience and working back towards the technology, the end of the quote is, not the other way around. I think in Web3, frequently, we have started with the technology and sort of figured the rest out later. And it's obvious because from a user experience perspective, there's a lot of sort of like frustrating things. And we're all, hey, we're early, you know? So we are sort of resilient and okay to deal with those things as early adopters in the space. But new people, when they experience a complicated, crazy technical product, they often get turned off by it. It's the reality. One of the things that Web2 has actually excelled at is sort of like hiding a lot of that stuff. I don't like a lot of the ways that they've done it necessarily, but you can't deny that they have created a system where the technology is almost invisible to the user, and that's clearly influenced their adoption. So I think we should all think about, if we think about especially new people to the space, tech can often be alienating. Like overly technical things can be alienating to people. Newcomers often aren't concerned with it. They're trying to solve a problem, or they're trying to learn about a space. They're trying to experiment in Web3. So to get something that's extremely technical that you don't understand is very off-putting. Similarly, this language barrier and lack of knowledge, the two previous points I talked about, means that a lot of times they don't even know what they're looking at. And that creates, again, this sort of feeling like, oh, geez, what am I supposed to do here? And this complexity reduces the adoption. It just does. When something is complex, people are much less likely to use it. And I think often, because of the technical aspects of these products and protocols and things, they sort of force users down a specific path that ends up being really like clunky and slow and hard and confusing. I mean, like manually adding a network, for example, is a very complicated and difficult process. It's also not intuitive. And so like, if you know that you're supposed to do that, sure, but otherwise you can be looking at a product and going, why am I not seeing this? Why is this not here? How do I do this? And that like sort of being forced down that path because of the way that the product is designed and set up, I think like in general creates a system where you're not thinking much about the user. You're thinking about the technology first, to go with Steve Jobs' quote there. So paradoxically though, it's often not the amount of technical complexity, in my opinion, but the lack of interoperability that really, really starts to make people not understand this whole space. So we talked in DeFi, I'm sure you all have remembered this or think about this. If you've been in DeFi, money Legos, right? Everything's supposed to just like plug in together. And in a sense, it does. But unfortunately, unfortunately, the experience overall is often very siloed, and there's extra steps added. I think that what we should be working towards is removing those extra steps and making sure that there are easier ways to connect things together. I was talking to the Moonbeam team here, and they're already thinking about this idea of like connected contracts, like layer 1 contracts that make it totally invisible to the user that you're interacting in a multi-chain context. This is the kind of thing that I think we need to move towards, where the invisibility of the technology doesn't mean that it's irrelevant. That's not at all what I'm suggesting. But the end user doesn't need to think about it constantly. And I guess like the last thing is that we need to focus, or like sort of wrapping this all up, is that we want to make sure that we're revealing technical things only when necessary or when the user themselves wants to pursue that. I think the basic, like it almost acts like layers, in my opinion, or like nested kind of concept maybe, is that like the tech that we want to see, the ways that tech is approached is basically only when I need to see it. Otherwise, I have a very simple, easy to use kind of product and interface. And this helps us prioritize trust, and it opens up new ways, as I mentioned with Moonbeam's example, for composability and interoperability. And so, like language and support, reducing the technical complexity really, really, really will help you develop stronger relationships with your users overall. So, like, just to kind of summarize, I believe user-focused design, communication, and support is going to fuel the next wave of crypto adopters, Web3 adopters. So, thanks so much. I have 20 seconds left. I don't know if we have time for questions. Do we have time for questions? I don't know.
I just wanted to say, excuse me, thank you. NFT sounds nice, but I don't know a single 8-year-old who knows what the word fungible means.
It's a great question, or the great comment, actually. Fungible is sort of a tricky word in general. And also, I will say, in terms of language, it would be very, I'm American, I'm a native English speaker, obviously, but I can't imagine how hard it would be to find reliable information in this space if you were not a native English speaker and trying to get started. I imagine the resources are far less available and far more like, can I trust this? And so I think that that's another area that we can probably improve on. Fungible, like, I don't know, for non-native English speakers, this is a strange word. Even for English speakers, this is a strange word. So like, I can't imagine how hard that is to like approach as a new person to the space. Thanks. Thank you.